Hi, welcome everyone from wherever you are to this great virtual event tonight. I'm Carrie Shepherd. I'm a reporter at WBEZ, Chicago's NPR station 91.5. I report on arts and culture. Tonight is the second event in a three-part series from ACLU, Illinois, and the Weinberg Newton Gallery, and it is called Vote Like Your Rights Depend on It 2020 Election Series. Just for everyone watching, we do have live captions. To turn them on, you can go to the bottom right screen there. You'll see, click the closed caption button at the bottom of the screen. We will be talking to three great artists tonight about the intersection of art and activism, the current political climate, and this is all part of Weinberg Newton's exhibition Anthem, which is both online, of course, like all things, it's virtual, but you can see it too. There are works in the storefront windows of the gallery on Waukee Avenue, actually by Ellen Rothenberg, who will be joining us tonight. The series examines voting rights in the United States through the works of contemporary artists. So as we know, we are just 20 days out from Election Day, and mail-in and early voting is already well underway here in Illinois and other places. And actually, you know, now today was the first day where you could early vote in the wards, not just downtown. So I want to introduce Kayla Flanagan and Luis Gomez from ACLU Illinois, and they're going to tell us more about this series and everything else that the organization is doing to prepare voters for this current election season. Kayla, Luis?
ACLU of Illinois.
We are gathering tonight during a critical moment for our country. In the midst of a global pandemic, protests across the country demanding an end to police violence, the urgent need to dismantle systemic racism, and the general election quickly approaching, our fundamental rights and liberties are at stake. For 100 years, the ACLU has been unyielding in our efforts to meet these challenges. And with your partnership, we will continue to persist. We're on the eve of an election that will have an overwhelming impact on what our future looks like. But regardless of the outcome of the election, we will need to work together to reconstruct the safeguards for our civil liberties and to rebuild our democracy. And each of us has an important role to play as partners in this work.
The importance of this election cannot be overstated. Across the country, the ACLU is doing everything in our power to ensure that the election is secure and fair for all voters who choose and are able to cast a vote. The ACLU has brought litigation to expand the right to vote, undertaken advocacy to remove barriers to voting, and in our neighboring states of Wisconsin and Michigan, our affiliates are joining local partners and investing deeply into both improving voter turnout and engagement and combating voter suppression that disproportionately targets Black, Latine, and young voters. Here in Illinois, we secured the right to vote for people awaiting trial while in state custody. Through all this work, we found that the most effective get-out-the-vote strategies are those that engage people in our own communities. In order to safeguard our democracy, we are going to need incredible voter turnout. And it's on every single one of us to reach out to the folks in our network and make sure, if they're eligible to vote, that they're registered. Invite them to sign up as poll watchers or election judges. Help them check that they filled out their mail-in ballot correctly, and drive them to a drop-off location or a polling place on election day. As a community, we need to continue building and creating new ways to support each other, because ultimately, no matter the outcome of this election, there will be plenty of work to do. If the demonstrations around this country this summer have shown us anything, it is that people are reaching the limit to the amount of injustice they can endure. While we vote this election cycle with democracy on the ballot, don't forget that justice is also on the ballot. Educate yourself about down-ballot candidates, support each other, and allow yourself to be inspired by our artists tonight, who hopefully can help us reimagine what by the people, for the people can look like.
activism can take on many different forms. Tonight, you'll hear directly from artists and see presentations of their work. We hope that you will feel inspired and determined. Thank you to David, Jerry, Kasha, and the whole gallery team for putting together such a compelling exhibition, being great partners, and for your commitment to voting rights and to the work of the ACLU. Now, we will hand it off to David Weinberg, Weinberg Newton Gallery founder and executive director.
Nice to have you with us tonight. I'm David Weinberg from the Weinberg Newton Gallery. And I want to tell you just a little bit about the Weinberg Newton Gallery. We are a non-commercial gallery, and our mission is to open discussions about social justice issues. And the way that we do that is through 4 exhibits every year, accompanied by multiple programs. And you are listening to one of those tonight. We've been doing this work for 7 years. We've had some terrific partners over the years. And I have to tell you that the exhibit we have up right now, which is Anthem, couldn't be more timely. This is very important. There are 2 different ways, I think Carrie mentioned, there are 2 different ways that you can view this exhibit. One is to drive by our gallery or walk to it. We're on Milwaukee Avenue between Grand and Chicago, and you will see the exhibit on, not in the window, but on the window. And the second way is by going to our website where we have a virtual exhibit. Originally, when we pivoted to virtual exhibits, I was afraid we were going to lose something. But given the subject matter, which is voting and voting rights, I have found that virtual exhibits actually give you an opportunity to reach out to other states, unlike when you have simply walk-in exhibits. So it's been great. Again, I want to give high praise to Kasha Houlihan, working closely with Emily Scott. Kasha is a co-director of our gallery, and Emily is with the ACLU and has mustered their team, and they've put together just a wonderful exhibit. Over the years, we've covered many, many, many different subjects. We've worked with the Human Rights Watch on immigration and challenging technologies. We've worked with the Center on Halstead on LGBTQ issues. We've worked with Open Lands on environmental issues, Shriver Center on poverty, and of course, our wonderful partner, the ACLU. Originally, we had an exhibit and programming around prison reform, and now this exhibit and programming around voting rights. And all I can say is thank goodness for the ACLU at a time like this. Wonderful having you with us. I hope you enjoy the program tonight. Should be very, very interesting. And with that, I'm going to sign off. Thank you.
Yeah, the ACLU and all the important work you all do. And also, just David, a great point you brought up about as hard it is as it has been for us all to be away from our art galleries and performance venues and other cultural places, the idea of virtual events does allow us to reach out beyond those walls. So that is indeed a plus to everything. So today's event, like Kayla mentioned, it's part discussion, but also sort of part exhibition and kind of private tour with the artists. They're going to present their works and explain them, which is always a really interesting way, I think, to take in creative work, to actually hear the inspiration behind it, the process, the thinking. If you have any questions for the artists during the event, you can chat them in the chat there, or you can also send an email to events@aclu-il.org. Let me say that again, events@aclu-il.org. So first, let's meet our artists that you're going to be hearing from tonight. Ari Afsar is a singer, a songwriter, and storyteller. Her most recent work is a pop musical in which she's the composer called Jeanette, and it's based on the life of Jeanette Rankin, who was the first woman to serve in Congress. Ari also starred as Eliza Schuler in the Chicago production of Hamilton. We all know it well. Adeshola Makinde is an artist based here in Chicago. Adeshola's work tends to challenge viewers to question the systems they find themselves in, which will hopefully cause them to have much needed conversations, hopefully like this one, with those closest to them regarding social justice issues. You may have seen Adeshola's work in the storefront windows of the Nike store downtown on Michigan Avenue. Also on, I think this is really interesting, you can see it at Adeshola's website, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, on billboards that featured quotes from Black Americans whom Adeshola says were not always talked about in history. And Ellen Rothenberg, whom I mentioned earlier, whose work is on the windows, as David mentioned, at the gallery. Ellen's public projects, installations, and performances are concerned with the politics of everyday life and the formation of communities through collaborative practices. And Ellen lives and works between Chicago and Berlin and teaches at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and is also a visiting fellow this year at Rework International Research Institute at Humboldt University, Berlin. Thank you, all of you. Thanks to all of you for joining us. So I just want to start, and I'm going to start with you, Ellen, actually. And I'm going to ask you, all three of you, the same question, but start with you, Ellen. When did you first realize your art could be used as a form of activism?
I think I always intentionally, I didn't separate the two. So as a red diaper baby, I was, art and activism were a given. And so from the beginning, I was interested in engaging with community and social and political issues in my work.
Did activism then drive you to do art, would you say? Or you felt like as an artist already, it was just a given, as you say?
I didn't see it as two separate activities. I saw them as very interrelated, and that people speak in different ways, and this was the way that I was addressing the world I was finding myself in.
Nice, nice. Ari, how about you?
I think that, and I wouldn't say I always believed this too, right? Like when, at least for me as a performer, and maybe this is specific and unique to performance, you want to get any job you can get. You want to work, and you want to take anything you can get. And so it actually turned into a privilege in order to then have the ability to be able to see art. But then, so I'm saying the whole trajectory and the arc of my thought process. But then I quickly realized and discovered that the only way we can change policy is through culture and shifting the culture. And the only way we can shift the culture is through great art. And so I think it takes a transition, because there's a sense of, especially as a performance, the urgency to just work. And when you then are in your body and understand the value of it, it starts to shift.
When you say that in the beginning, artist, you just want to work, do you feel now as you are more established, do you feel not that just you can be more choosy, right? But do you feel your own activism, your own political views, your own cultural views helping you decide what kind of work you will take?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I definitely think but I think that, that yes, the establishment of being able to do some pretty awesome things allowed me to have that type of perspective. But I also think that there wasn't an understanding when I was younger, right? When I was going on auditions at 18 years old or whatever it may be, or trying to get in rooms, there was not that understanding because it was so much desperation, which I think is like an issue within at least the performing sector of our industry. And we're not giving power where the power needs to be, which is within the actors. And so I think that power shift and that hierarchy dynamic needs to actually change dramatically in order for that type of desperation to be eliminated.
Yeah, absolutely. Adeshola, let's bring you in here, and I know everyone's going to get to see your art, which is great. Tell me, when did it start for you? When did you see this either intersection of art driven by activism, your activism driving your art? Oh, Adeshola, you're on mute. There you go. Awesome.
In my art practice, I've always wanted to educate and share information. And I feel like in this moment, that's something that I feel is what needs to be done. Is I think people need to re-educate themselves, share as much information as possible. I just feel as though that's the catalyst to change. So that's something that I'm always striving to do in my work.
Nice. Well, speaking of, let's see your work and then talk a little bit about it afterward, so everyone can see it. So Adeshola, here is his presentation of his art.
You can begin. So with my fine art practice, I kind of got my start in collage. I've always had a love for magazines, print publications, and pop culture figures. In a lot of my work, you'll see primarily Black figures. That's a very conscious and intentional thought. I feel like we've constantly been left out of the fine art conversation as a whole. There's select people, but not a ton. But because of that, I was drawn towards Ebony and Jet magazine, which are both magazines that are founded in Chicago right here. And the issues that I tended to gravitate towards were ones from the 50s and 60s during the civil rights era, which lends itself well to the kind of work and subject matter I like to touch on. Collage is often something that you'll find throughout the various mediums that I work in, particularly clothing, fashion and clothing, and public art as well. Like Carrie mentioned, for instance, with public art, Nike reached out and wanted me to create a poster that would be shown on their store on Michigan Avenue, and they wanted it to be about peace and equality, and I was able to put something together. Next. Fashion is something that I've always enjoyed expressing myself through ever since I was a kid. So including this into my art practice made complete sense. I view it as another way to educate, inform people with information, and also advertise. I think clothing is one of the best forms of advertising out there. Clothing is where I see a lot of collaboration happening within my art practice. I've worked with various brands like Chrome Industries, like the one you see here, that's currently for sale. They reached out and wanted me to design a t-shirt with some of my work, and they allowed for me to choose the organization that it went to. And I chose Asada's Daughters primarily because they're doing that education that I had mentioned a little earlier on. And here's another shirt from a brand called Infinite Archives that they commissioned me to make a t-shirt that was kind of to push people to go to the polls on November 3rd. And all the proceeds of this shirt went towards When We All Vote, which is a really great voting initiative. And next. And this final section here, public art is one of my favorite mediums to work in. And in the works that you'll see here, it's a part of a larger body of work entitled Relevant. And they're repurposed protest signs from the civil rights era. And it's just, the purpose of them is to spark conversation and just talk about how unfortunately they still are relevant almost half a century later. And the unique thing about this body of work is that it was actually crowdfunded via GoFundMe. Early on in June, Safe Art Space, a really great partners in this project reached out and wanted to get these up in 50 states. And that was the initial goal. And I honestly didn't think I was going to raise more than 5,000. And we ended up raising 22,000. And we were able to get these protest signs in 22 different states. And as you see at the end here, these works started out as silk screen on canvas, poster size. And that's kind of the nature of my work. I think this message in particular, and a lot of the messaging in my work, doesn't really need a box to live in. I kind of see myself working in various different mediums. Hopefully in a few years, you'll see sculpture, screen printing or whatnot. But with these canvases here, I definitely want to, in 2021, the goal is to get them in a few institutions to show as a whole. There's 29 pieces in total, all different and separate sayings. And that is it.
Nice. The 50 states project that you talked about is that it's in 22 states. Something you said I think is really interesting, that you really like public art because it starts this conversation. Have you been able to have conversations, actually literal conversations with people who are viewing that art that you've created, whether it be on a shirt for Chrome or whether it be those billboards? And what have those been like?
I haven't necessarily had, conversations like out on the street about the billboards, but my sister actually, who lives in the Bay, there were billboards that went up. There were 3 billboards that went up in Oakland, one of which that said "Free all political prisoners" was on the same street as the original Black Panthers headquarters.
Oh, wow.
And she had mentioned to me that when she went to go take photos of it for me and see it, that a lot of the houseless people that were around were really enthused and stoked about the work being up. And that made me feel really great, because that's kind of another aspect of this work, is to make Black people feel seen.
Yeah, that's another thing another thread I wanted to follow on. You have all those in your collage work, all those awesome images like Nina Simone from Jet and Ebony, and looking through old Jet and Ebony magazines, it's art, it's beautiful. And that's obviously a little before your time. Do you feel like you had examples of that in your generation, of seeing sort of artistic layouts like that, of, like you said, you're conscious of putting African Americans in your work so they can be seen and see themselves?
Yeah, I don't feel like it's something that I saw a lot as a kid, to be honest. Certain television shows and whatnot, sure, I think it's definitely at a higher level today. But the reason I kind of chose those magazines is because Ebony and Jet specifically worked with various companies and whatnot to produce advertisements for McDonald's, Coca-Cola. And I don't even feel like whenever you see like pointed advertisements like that today, it can be kind of cringeworthy and kitschy sometimes. I'm sure I can mention the Popeyes commercial and everyone will know what I'm talking about. But yeah, I just think at that point in time, they were far more intentional about what they showed. For
sure. So I want to bring Ellen and Ari back, but stay with you here for a minute, Adeshola, and talk about this election year. I don't know, it feels like it's been an election decade, kind of, and talk to you and ask you how approaching this upcoming election next month, and your work as an artist, is it different from how you looked at politics before with your work, or do you feel like it's been pretty consistent, the intersection of that?
I feel like it's been pretty consistent with the work I've done. The past 3 or so years, I've kind of been on the same arc of work. And, the way that I'm approaching this election is, I showed earlier in my presentation that I worked with an organization to help raise funds for an organization that was trying to get people to the polls. But, something that I feel really called to during this election time is to not only just vote, but also like there's so much more that needs to be done, which Luis kind of touched on in his intro. Is I just feel as though, helping out, raise money with mutual aid programs, and helping those that are on the front line doing the important work. But yeah, I think that's how I'm approaching it.
Ari, how about you? Like this work that you're doing, Jeanette, the first woman in Congress, is that a response to the current political environment, to a response to who our current president is? How do you see that your art and your work has changed in this election cycle?
Yeah, I've been working on Jeanette for about 3 years now. So the importance of who are our foremothers and telling this, woman who was elected 4 years before the ratification of the 19th Amendment, giving white women the right to vote and telling that story. But I think that there is the importance of also like with the election cycle, but also how are we able to create art in COVID? And so how can we adapt, and how can I adapt in this new world? And it was obviously very difficult because the thing that we do is perform and we gather, right, and we can't do that. And so we pivoted to, instead of focusing on like, when we get to Broadway, we will make the change that we want to make. What can we do now, and who are the people that we can affect, and how can we connect minds and change perspectives now at a different level? And it's the same thing when it comes to politics, right? It's not just about the presidential election, it's about local elections, it's about municipality. And so that can also be applied to art, that I've discovered. And so what we've been doing is we turned our 2.5 musical into a 25-minute virtual performance where we have been offering it to progressive candidates across the country. My book writer and I always joke, we're like today I was in New York earlier today for a candidate in New York. And right, yesterday I was in Ohio. And so how can we be able to flip as many seats to change minds, change perspectives, open hearts, open wallets? And then the benefit also is being able to see the candidates themselves being inspired. So we had the pleasure of doing a virtual musical for soon-to-be Representative Cori Bush in Missouri 12 days before she won the primary. And her reaction, I was like, oh, this is I didn't even realize, like, the byproduct of also inspiring the candidate themselves. So we've had the pleasure to do it for folks like Cori Bush or Senator Tammy Duckworth or Mark Kelly or Doug Jones, and also local municipality in Montana. And I think that has given me drive and purpose to offer this free service, to be able to raise money and flip seats, and art can do that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not just about the presidential race, right? All politics is local, and it's so critical at such a local level, like who are in those seats. And also, I think you speak so well about the adaptability of creative people. Performers and artists, they're always adapting, and they're always adapting to different environments and finding a way to create that art. Ellen, I want to bring you in and sort of have you show your work, your presentation, and then come back and talk to you a little bit more about it after we all get to see it.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so I've always been interested in the possibilities of working outside of an institutional context. Working on the street has been one modality. By its very nature, the street is a democratic space, always open, free, inclusive, and diverse. It's the space of social exchange, chance encounters, commerce, houselessness, and protest. I also wanted to locate, for people who aren't in Chicago, Weinberg Newton on the street. It's on Milwaukee Ave, which cuts a diagonal right through Chicago's grid. It's a very busy commuter roadway. It has bike lanes on either side and subway underneath. And it's about 2 miles north of the absolute center of downtown. everyone's been talking about politics, voting, but also COVID in the last months have been really shaped by the pandemic. Chicago went on lockdown March 20th because of the pandemic. And suddenly we were in this social distanced isolation. I know for myself and for everyone else that almost all communication shifted to virtual. It was a very chaotic and frightening month as people began to understand the implications of the virus, which is invisible, virulent, and spreading constantly. So as all communication shifted from actual to virtual, and the pandemic spread, one thing that I noticed was that the fissures and inequities in our political and social systems were really highlighted. They were visible for everyone, and they were aggravated. Wisconsin had its primary election on April 7th, and despite the really very real risks, people were forced to vote in person during a pandemic lockdown because of the conflicting political efforts to skew or impact the vote. The images showcase a national portrait of chaos and dysfunction. People standing 6 feet apart for hours in the rain to exercise the right to vote. We all got to see this on broadcast TV and on blogs and posted. They endured delays caused by the shortages of poll workers, closed or limited numbers of polling stations, malfunctioning equipment. Suddenly, citizenship was a labor inscribed across these events by ordinary people. I was very affected by that. I'm like an archive freak. I tend to do a lot of research for my projects. And I started working on the piece for Weinberg Newton for Anthem by looking at the Smithsonian's collections of voting rights ephemera, particularly materials that had startling relevance to the present. If you could just hold on this, Luis. One thing that, I saw this image of, it was a poll tax poster broadside, right? And I think it was the last poll tax was outlawed by either the Voting Rights Act or the Civil Rights Act of 64 and 65. But when I saw this, I thought about Florida's Amendment 4, the Voting Rights for Felon Initiatives ballot initiative, and the kind of situation that, although that was passed by a plebiscite in Florida, it is now completely tied up because felons have been asked to pay for their fees that were incurred during their prosecution, even though there's no way to calculate that the amounts. It's something that went to the Florida Court of Appeals, and the judge actually said that this is a current poll tax. So I was interested in the way that these historical documents spoke to the present. Thanks.
Thanks, Ellen. This ephemera is is great. Oh, sorry. Are you're still going, right?
I still have some more stuff, but if you
No,
have,
no, we're gonna keep going. We're gonna keep going. But I've got some questions about those buttons when we come.
so as everybody knows, on May 25th, George Floyd was murdered, and his death was witnessed by millions of people who felt compelled by this violence and the many other murders of Black men and Black women in the United States to insist on change. Despite the pandemic, hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets globally. This image that we're looking at now is an image of Terrence Floyd, George Floyd's brother, speaking at the site of his brother's murder and memorial. So this is some views of the installation in the galleries, on the gallery windows, on the facade of the building. It's called Let's Switch It Up, which it was titled from a fragment of Terrence Floyd's speech, which was an impassioned plea for people to vote, to educate themselves, rather than resort to violence in their communities. The work is dedicated to Black Lives Matter and on the centennial of the 19th Amendment to women activists whose contributions continued to be obscured and erased. You know, people were talking, I mean, earlier we were all talking about having to pivot, the ways in which the pandemic has forced us to think about new ways of working. And I was really excited to be able to produce an online component to this piece. You can hear Terrence Floyd's speech along with the voices of poets and other women activists of Let's Switch It Up. People whose history needs to be revisited, whose words are filled with wisdom and energy and purpose and inspiration. And we were hoping to be able to play a few video clips, but the technology didn't work. So I wanted to give you this link, and you can also find it in the chat. Thanks so much.
Right.
Fine.
No, those are.
I was probably way too long.
No, you were great. You were great. That's a lot of history, and it's really interesting. I think the reason I cut in after the ephemera and voting, I was curious. You said that there were so many that had just a startling resemblance to today. What were some of those? What are some examples you remember finding and thinking, I could find this, you know?
Well, I mean, there was something from '86 for the gay and lesbian vote. There was vote environment. There was votes for women from, very, very early 20th century, and then Register Sister from later on. There was, who you calling immigrant pilgrim, which I thought was, just very in this atmosphere of criminalization and racist rhetoric around Latino community. And I thought that was, something that we need to remember, the people who are here before us, whose history and identities have been, completely they're not erased, they're very present, but there have been a lot of attempts to kind of other them. And I thought that was a really huge pushback. There were lots of campaign buttons, And I just, like that first image, voter suppression is violence, that was from 94 from the Poor People's Campaign.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. The early there in your presentation, I think that was an image of you when you were doing a performance, right? Where there were cops next to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you were talking about the importance of performance like that and performance art because of democratization. Is that something you'd still do? Do you think that is that still available to people, that performance art like that? I mean, put COVID aside.
Definitely. I think that any form of activism, especially activism in public space,
Mm-hmm.
it's challenging right now for COVID, but really being outside is the safest place to be with other people.
Right.
But, the newspaper suit, a lot of those images were from performances that I did in the 90s, 80s and 90s. And, there was nothing like it. It was a totally different experience than performing in a gallery setting or in a museum, which I also did. But the kind of audience, you're out there with everyone. The police came because some people that was a spot where a lot of homeless people congregated, and I was on their territory. So they called the police over. So you never know, and what's going to happen. It was also a moment when a lot of the hospitals were closing, and there were quite a few people with that were moved from psychiatric hospitals onto the street.
Sure. Adeshola, I want to bring you in. Ellen talked about this, and I think you really see it in Ellen's work about how this summer's, the protests sort of made their way into Ellen's work. Also, how COVID and the pandemic has changed how you work. I wondered, Adeshola, for you, how both of those events that have become, the signifiers of 2020, how have they changed or altered your art, or have they?
I don't necessarily think that the moment has really made me change my art. I think it's just amplified my mission statement of wanting to, challenge people that view my art, to have tough conversations, but also, going back to the education thing, trying to make that the cornerstone of my work. I've been doing a lot of reading in this time. I've been reading a lot of books by Black authors. So that's definitely how I've approached this moment. I actually have a quote here, a quote that I've been going back to a lot, by George Jackson. I read this early on in the uprisings that were going on, and this book is actually available on PDF, but it says each partisan outside the vanguard elements should work at radicalizing in the area at their natural environment, the places where they pursue their normal lives when not attending rallies and demonstrations. And I keep going back to that because I think everyone has a role in trying to change this society. I don't think necessarily everyone needs to be in the streets, but you can be challenging those that you work with, your family, your immediate circles. I think that's where change happens, is when we, get active in our communities.
And I don't know if this is how you've read it as well. Like, you don't have to wait for an uprising in the streets of many, many people. You can do it on this micro level, and it can have this macro impact.
For sure. And, that's where definitely what I took from that quote as well, is just, there's so much work to be done when uprisings aren't happening, or protests aren't happening, or an election isn't happening. There's just so much work to be done in our day-to-day lives. We vote with our dollars every day. How are you spending those dollars? Those kinds of things.
Does that overwhelm you? And I would ask all three of you. There's so much work to be done, and you have this avenue through art and creativity and showing it to people. Do you feel overwhelmed by it ever? That you'll ever be able to get that your art can ever respond to how much is happening?
I wanted to add something, and that is that I'm a high risk for COVID person, and that I haven't been able to go to any of the demonstrations. I've really been experiencing everything through the lens of media, right? But like Adeshola, I'm teaching as part of, I've been teaching at the Art Institute for many years. But I'm also very inspired by the energy and the unity of the demonstrations, as well as all of those historical materials and individuals who are in the videos, you know, writers, activists, poets who are, you know, 40 years of struggle.
Right.
I mean, the thing that's really challenging is that the same problems just are cycling.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of sort of what motivated my question about the overwhelming. Ari, I want to bring you in, and I want everyone, we've talked so much, about what you're working on with Jeanette and all of the ways you're using it for local political activism, but you're going to give us a little bit of that performance, right?
Yes, I am so honored to be here and sharing the space, this virtual space, with everyone. Thank you for having me a part of, and it was beautiful to see both of the artists' work. We talked a little bit about Jeanette and the importance of local elections and state elections, and it's not just about the presidential election. And a lot of times, this next song that I'm going to be singing, I've had the honor and privilege to open for Michelle Obama and Gloria Steinem most recently earlier this year. And I think the question that you asked, Carrie, does it get overwhelming? And it does get overwhelming when we think about, at least I'm going to speak for me, when I think about what I am doing, it gets really overwhelming. How can I accomplish it all? How can I continue to solve what I think needs to be changed when it's about me? And I think the overwhelming starts to subsidize when we realize that we all are doing it together, and then it takes every single person in order to see the change. And I know it sounds so cheesy, but it kind of leads me up to this song of We Won't Sleep, is if we do it together, if we stick to our guns and don't compromise, or stick to our ambitions and don't compromise, and work together as a unit instead of focusing on what I can do and how I can make the difference, I think when that overwhelming starts to subsidize, or subsidize is not the right word, starts to melt away. So
I got you.
Subsidize. I said subsidize twice, and I was like, that's not right.
No, you're saying the community and the communal, right? That dissipates, kind of,
yeah,
right?
Dissipates. Exactly. Yeah. So this song is called We Won't Sleep, and it speaks exactly to that question. If we do it together, maybe we can actually start to make the world a little bit a better place. It's called We Won't Sleep. We've been trying, woman and child, could make it easy, could live in denial. We saw the world end, but it keeps spinning, whether we're losing, whether we're winning. Then they start to fade while we're wide awake and feeling alive. Been staying up late, 'cause we know the stakes of losing lives. We won't sleep, they'll try to get us, but
Yay! Such a rallying, I would say, anthem. Perfect for a show about titled Anthem. That was awesome, Ari. I love the even when we're compromised, right? Is that the line? Even if we're
Um,
compromised
no, even through the blurry eyes,
through the
maybe we
blur,
won't compromise.
we won't compromise. Got it. Got it. That's awesome. It's a great rallying cry. I look forward to hearing it and seeing it in the context of the larger work. So we just have a few minutes here. So I just want to do a quick wrap up with each of you. Obviously, Ari, we've talked about what's coming up for you, but bringing Adeshola and Ellen back. I wondered if you had thought about since we are talking about the election and it's 20 days away, have you thought about whatever the outcome is, how or if your art will change or the way you approach your creative process? Do you see it changing come November, like whoever is president?
I don't know if I can answer that. That's like so. I will say this is like a little plug. I'm releasing a concept album under Sony actually this Friday, October
Nice.
16th, and I knew I needed to release it before the election. I had
Why?
to. I I needed to release how I was feeling right now, and I didn't want to prepare for how I'd feel so differently. And I do think my art will change, and I do think I'll feel. And I just as the top of the stay-at-home order when everything got pulled, in terms of agenda aspect, I stepped away from music for a while, and I started a nonprofit, and I needed to separate myself in order to be re-inspired. And I assume that it might be similar for me personally.
Nice. Adeshola, how about you?
Yeah. The way that I see my art, I don't really see my, the subject matter changing all that much. I think, the things I'm speaking about will persist regardless of who's president. But for me, it's important to really hone in on supporting those in the community, doing mutual aid type of work. Because I honestly feel like, we spend a lot of time worried about those in power, but I think we all can help each other, more than we think, outside of going to vote and whatnot. But so in my work, I'm going to try and donate towards organizations doing that kind of stuff through collaborations that I have coming up and whatnot. But yeah.
Sounds like organizing is another outlet for you in addition to your art and your work. You're using that as another arm of activism.
Yeah, I don't necessarily want to call myself an organizer, because I think that's incredibly hard work that, there are people out there doing that work. I by no means do that, but I think those in that doing that work can use help, especially monetarily. So if I can provide that through my artwork in some way, I want to be able to do that.
Got it. Ellen, how about you? So much in the Anthem exhibition is these rallying cries from elections years and years ago. Do you see how your next project or your approach to your work, how do you see it changing no matter the outcome next month?
I don't think I can get into the no matter the outcome state of mind.
Okay.
I think the outcome is going to have a huge impact on all of us. I'm hoping to be able to travel more. I mean, I think that one of the really hard things is, or one of the challenges is, the election has been taking up, between the election and COVID, there's a lot less fluidity in terms of being in touch with people in other places and getting their perspective and having those experiences. So I'm hoping that there will be opportunities for more international discussion and alliances and collaborations and Yeah, so
Expanding our worlds again,
yeah,
from here to here.
really great. I mean,
Yeah.
I appreciate my neighbors more than ever right now.
Yeah.
And you know, people who kind of helped to sustain us throughout these last months. But I find this kind of inability to move really a challenge. And so I'm hoping that, you know, it's also been sort of the national profile to have this kind of nationalist agenda, which I don't think is productive. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to have conversations with people in other places, not just online.
Right. The community. Thank you, Ellen. Ellen Rothenberg and Adeshola Makinde and Ari Afsar. Thank you so much for being with us tonight and answering these questions and sharing your work and the thoughts and everything that goes into it. I know that it's it's a difficult time, as you say, and I think the three of you being able to still be creative and still bring that art and that work to everyone, I would say I appreciate it so much, and I think that's truly a gift. So thank you to all three of you, and you can see Ellen's work at the Weinberg Newton website and Anthem. And then also in the chat, I believe Emily's been putting links both to Ari's work, both to Adeshola's work, so you can find that. I'm going to toss it back to Luis and Kayla from ACLU, Illinois, to give you some more critical information about participating in the political process. So Kayla and Luis.
Thanks, Carrie. And thanks everyone for attending tonight's event. And special thanks to Ari, Adeshola, Carrie, David, and Ellen for such an inspiring evening. So please keep an eye out for more information from us about voting in this election. We will be sending updates through email. You can follow us on social media, and you can read more on our website. We hope you can join us after the election on November 18th for the final event in the Vote Like Your Rights Depend on It series, featuring ACLU of Illinois Executive Director Colleen Connell. We encourage you to view the Anthem exhibit online and learn more about all of the artists' work. Links can be found in the chat. And don't forget to vote like your rights depend on it on November 3rd. Thanks, everyone, and have a great night.
Thank you.